The first repatriation flight from India has landed, but with only half the number of passengers. That's disappointing, isn't it?
Well, Gabriella, I think the thing that we need to be very conscious of and be really quite grateful for is that we actually have had the first flight come through. So clearly, we would have liked that to have been a full flight, but the reality is that about 40 people tested COVID positive, which meant that they could not get on that aircraft. And then there were about 30 of their close contacts that were also not allowed to board the aircraft. Look, we couldn't keep those people safe on the plane here. We couldn't run the risk of infection being transmitted clearly to anyone else on that aircraft. So it was unfortunate that they couldn't board, but we will do all that we can to get them here as soon as they are well enough to travel.
But don't we have a responsibility to bring these sick Australians back home where they can get adequate care?
We've always been very clear that what we will do is make sure that people are COVID negative before they get on a flight to come to Australia. That's why we have such comprehensive testing procedures in place. And it's basically a two-step process now with a PCR test that's done up to 72 hours before travel, and then a rapid antigen test that's done pretty much at the point of embarkation, just a bit before that. And that's to make sure that we aren't bringing people into the country with COVID. Now, we have done so well as a nation to keep as much of the COVID pandemic out of here as is possible. So we're not going to put at risk all of the work that has been done by Australians, and we're not going to get ourselves into a situation where we have issues with quarantine facilities and their ability to cope with people coming in.
Opposition leader Anthony Albanese made the point just moments ago that at the start of this pandemic, we could bring Australians home from Wuhan at the centre of this outbreak, but now we can't bring Australians home that are stranded in India. Do you think it's fair?
Look, a lot has been learned over the last 14 or so months about how to deal with this. There are now mutant strains that didn't exist or we weren't aware of them 12 to 14 months ago. So I don't think it's realistic to say, well, we could do something 12 months ago. Why can't we do it now? Because the simple answer is we know a lot more about how transmissible this disease is, what the risks are, what our capabilities are to cope with that as a nation, and quite frankly, what the people of Australia expect their federal government to do to protect them.
But this pandemic isn't going away anytime soon. What hope do sick and vulnerable Australians in India have that they will be able to get home anytime soon?
Well, what we have said is that we will be bringing flights in every 7 to 9 days. We will have a flight arriving from India. We said we would focus on the most vulnerable people and bring those people home as soon as we possibly could. But we cannot and will not bring people into Australia that have tested COVID positive.
Okay, Minister, you've been on the Christchurch call to action this morning,
Mhm.
working with other world leaders to combat online terrorism.
Yeah.
What commitments were made out of this meeting?
Well, let's just put a bit of context around this as well. This was actually the second anniversary of the Christchurch call to action. So that came about as the result of the terrorist attacks on two mosques in Christchurch. Australia was one of the founding members of the call to action, and we've been very active looking at online issues in relation to terrorism. So clearly, this is a global issue. Hatred has no boundaries. So we need to work globally, and that's why there were about 50 nations on that call this morning, led by Prime Minister Ardern and President Macron. So what we had with the nations, and a significant number, so well over 50 of those nations were so committed to looking at what we can do to deal with the fact that there is an ongoing terrorism threat. That threat is not going away. There is an ongoing issue with radicalisation, particularly of young people, but not only of young people, and that we need to work together globally to do all that we can to counter the risk of terrorism and radicalisation online. So during the last 12 to 14 months during COVID, more people were indoors accessing online material. What we want to do is make sure that the tech companies are working with us to limit the way that this material is available online. We certainly want them to work on their algorithms so that they're actually not pushing this information through to people.
Okay. ASIO will also be receiving a $1.3 billion boost. This is one of the largest boosts that ASIO has received in its history, and artificial intelligence is going to be a key component. Why is that needed?
Artificial intelligence certainly will be a large component of the work that ASIO needs to do. The threat environment and the environment in which we live is becoming increasingly complex, and we need to make sure that ASIO in particular is well resourced to deal with that, particularly from a technology perspective. So we know, and the head of ASIO actually has publicly said this, humans are very good at collecting dots, collecting information. What we will be looking at doing is using machines effectively to start connecting those dots so that we have a very clear picture of what's happening here in Australia. So artificial intelligence, machine learning is going to be key to helping ASIO do the job that they need to do, which is to make sure that Australians are safe and secure.
Have recent cyber attacks prompted this investment?
They've reinforced the view that acting is an urgent criteria now for us. So we announced the cybersecurity strategy last year. We've already started to roll that out. We know that there are vulnerabilities. We know that we need to work on that not only at a government level, but we need to work with industry to make sure that they are doing all that they can to protect themselves. And to, again, put that into perspective, businesses understand that they need to take care of their physical security, so locking the gates, doors, windows, those sorts of things, safes. But we need to make sure that they understand the risks for them and for their customers and also their supply chains if they aren't cyber and data secure. So it'll be government, industry, and of course we need to make sure that the mums and dads understand what they need to do to keep themselves safe online. So it's a $1.67 billion commitment that we have made with our federal cyber security strategy, and I'll be working to roll that out over the coming weeks and months.
Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews, appreciate you being so generous with your time this morning. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Take care.